Hello and welcome to The Broken Sword. Today we are looking at the abandoned sequel to The Lord of the Rings.
Build me an army worthy of Mordor.
Before we get into this, I have a call to action for all of you. When I look at our analytics, only 22% of you have hit that subscribe button. So I'm here to ask you, what have you got to lose? Help support the channel and really help us hit that 150,000 subscriber goal. By hitting that button and that bell icon too, you can get notified of all of our future uploads. So I hope we can get that number up, and I will let you know how we do next week. I thank you in advance, and now let's jump into it. Many years ago, Tolkien released the epic story of The Lord of the Rings. The One Ring was destroyed. Aragorn became king of the reunited kingdoms and brought peace to Middle-earth. But one thing people often wonder or ask is, what happened after this? Was this truly the end of the evil? Did anyone rise again to challenge the peace? Well, J R R Tolkien once put pen to paper to attempt to write a sequel to his best-selling story. However, it was never finished. So let us look at what we know about this today, starting with one of his letters written the year before his passing. I have written nothing beyond the first few years of the Fourth Age, except the beginning of a tale supposed to refer to the end of the reign of Eldarion, about 100 years after the death of Aragorn. Then I of course discovered that the King's Peace would contain no tales worth recounting, and his wars would have little interest after the overthrow of Sauron. But that almost certainly a restlessness would appear about then, owing to the, it seems, inevitable boredom of men with the good. There would be secret societies, practices, dark cults, and orc cults among adolescents. So, we had Tolkien thinking after completing The Lord of the Rings that a sequel may be something he wanted to dabble with. But this did not go to plan and feelings changed. The information for this sequel comes from the History of Middle-earth, Volume 12, The Peoples of Middle-earth book, where there is a section dedicated to what he had written. Tolkien only ever got about 13 pages into this before it was abandoned, but in those pages we had generally focused on two characters, Borlas, who was the son of Beregond, and Ceylon, son of Duilin of Gondor, but otherwise unknown family. Also, so you are aware here, the Beregond mentioned is the same Beregond from The Lord of the Rings, being the one who Peregrine Took befriends while in Minas Tirith, when he became one of the Guard of the Citadel. He was also the one to save Faramir from Denethor's insanity, and nearly be killed by a troll chief at the Battle of the Morannon before, again Pippin came along and this time killed the troll, saving his life. As for Ceylon, he is a character who we know little of his lineage, but we do know in an earlier draft he was named either Arthael in version B, or Outnorth turned Egelmoth in A as well. However, then in the third transcript, labelled simply as transcript C, his name was then altered to Ceylon, and this seems to be the last version. So how about we go through a bit of a summary of just what was written in those 13 pages so we can understand more about Tolkien's thoughts. And I will add here, just before the summary starts, it appears it never truly left his mind, despite people also saying he gave up on it, as it does say in The Peoples of Middle-earth that, I do not know the source of this statement, but further evidence is provided by a used envelope, postmarked 8th of January 1968, on the back of which my father scribbled a passage concerning Borlas, developing further the account of his circumstances at the time of the opening of the story. This is certain evidence that he was still concerned with the new shadow as late as 1968, and since the passage roughed out here would follow on from the point reached in the transcript C, it seems very likely that C dates from that time. Okay, so let's get into what was written for the new shadow. Everything starts with us being told just when it is, and that is in the days of the rule of Eldarion, son of that ELESSAR of whom the histories have much to tell. It is now 150 years after Sauron had been defeated, and the majority of people now remember so little of that evil, with many of the stories now having become more like myths and legends rather than recent history. This is where we are introduced to Borlas of Pen Arduin, younger son of Aragorn, who had moved from the city to the Emin Arnin. Here at the beginning of the story, he comes across and starts having a conversation with Ceylon. Borlas feels that there is still evil, or that there will always be evil, no matter how many times it is cut down. And Ceylon, being the far younger of the two and friend to Borlas' son, only half listens to the older man. The two are sat in Borlas' garden, one that sits near to the Anduin and in the sight of the city in the distance, with the city, as it is called, referring to Minas Tirith. Ceylon recounts an earlier experience of the two, where Master Borlas, as Ceylon calls him, caught him stealing from his orchards, took him into his house and gave him a good talking to. This is where we get the first mention of orcs' work as a term for something bad that he was doing. Ceylon mentions how he had been offended by this, and even considered getting him and his friends to cut down Borlas' trees to really make him think that orcs may have returned, just like kids might react. This confession worried Borlas a bit inside, but the two brush past this part of the conversation. They then compare the idea of how it is not right to be picking fruit before it is fully ripe, to chopping down a tree before it has fulfilled its life story. And in this regard, would trees consider men above orcs at all? With Borlas then explaining that it is the joy and want to do these things over the necessity that can make all the difference. As it progresses, Ceylon mentions the name HERUMOR, to Borlas' great shock, and as the notes from this chapter says, the name HERUMOR is found in Of the Rings of Power and the Third Age, the Silmarillion page 293. As that of a renegade Numenorean who became powerful among the Haradrim in the time before the War of the Last Alliance. And so, as a side note here, I wonder if this HERUMOR is a character that we may see in the Rings of Power Amazon show. Why not leave me a comment of the Rings of Power if you would like to see a more expanded version of this potentially interesting character. But anyway, let's get back to the story. After bringing up this evil name, Ceylon says how people are less happy and far less scared since the death of Aragorn, referred to as the Great King, and that numbers grow in this feeling all the time. Borlas wonders how Ceylon could possibly know of all this growing evil, to which Ceylon tells him to meet him after full darkness, clad in black, if he wishes to learn more of what he knows. Borlas thought to himself for a time when Ceylon had left. And here we get the first mention of the Dark Tree, the term for the growing threat within Middle-earth. And Borlas wonders why on earth he would be invited to join Ceylon into this. He still remembers the true evil of old firsthand, and he's getting on in his years, so what use could he really be, or what hope could they really have of truly turning him? However, Borlas realised that he had been challenged, and he now must rise to this challenge and accept to find out whatever outcome may come from it. Maybe this is what his life has been leading up to. Borlas now enters back into the house, but everything was not normal. He could now smell an evil of old. And this is where the story in both transcripts A and B end. We never get to find out just what was waiting for Borlas that night, or what Ceylon was truly a part of. Personally, this leaves me with so many questions. I would love to know what happened next. But Tolkien did address his issues with this story in another one of his letters, this time to Colin Bailey, where he said, I did begin a story placed about 100 years after the downfall, but it proved both sinister and depressing. Since we are dealing with men, it is inevitable that we should be concerned with the most regrettable feature of their nature, their quick satiety with good. So that the people of Gondor in times of peace, justice, and prosperity would become discontented and restless, while the dynasts descended from Aragorn would become just kings and governors, like Denethor or worse. I found that even so early there was an outcrop of revolutionary plots about a centre of secret satanistic religion, while Gondorian boys were playing at being orcs and going around doing damage. I could have written a thriller about the plot and its discovery and overthrow, but it would be just that, not worth doing. I could have written a thriller about the plot and its discovery and overthrow, but it would be just that, not worth doing. Not worth doing. As much as I can fully appreciate Tolkien's thoughts and what he believed, I feel like many other people in that they would have loved to hear what happened next. I do understand that by writing a thriller as such, he put himself into this box of certain rules he had to follow. He didn't have the openness of his high fantasy world that he had written about before, but I don't feel like that would have been a bad thing for him. I still think he could have absolutely nailed it. He wrote an amazing children's bedtime story, then he wrote an amazing fantasy epic. So why not an incredible thriller as well? There is also something quite interesting to note here, and that is that in the third transcript, so transcript C, the text actually finishes just after Sauron leaves Borlas. So anything in that summary I just put after that point is only from transcript B. After all, it took a time after finding the second transcript for Christopher Tolkien to find the most up-to-date version, as he had even done a reading of the B version in Oxford in 1992, when he still believed for that to be the last one. So it is quite interesting to think about this time within Middle-earth. The reign of Aragorn had ended, the magic of Middle-earth was lessening all the time, and by this point there were not many people who still remembered the evil of Sauron firsthand. Men's memories are short. If they had not lived it, the threat is never as pressing, and that is where the idea of the dark tree comes from. The roots are deep. Evil is always there, and unless you pull out these roots, it will always grow again. And as well, having that opposite to the white tree in Gondor was bound to have been an intentional choice too. It would have been interesting to know if we ever got to see any of the remaining fragments of magic within Middle-earth, or if it would well and truly have been just a story about men. Would there have been any living orcs to speak of, trolls, wargs, any evil that had hidden itself far and deep away? Also, if we would have seen anything of Eldarion firsthand. After all, in his latest edition, Tolkien had decided that the new Shadow story would be set in the year 220 of the Fourth Age, which coincides with the same year of Eldarion's death. Therefore, it could well have been likely that this is something we may have either witnessed or been aware of happening at this time. Perhaps even one or some of his several sisters, as he was said to have, would have made an appearance too. We will never really know. It is also interesting to consider how the evil would have come about. We have the mention of HERUMOR, being the leader of the growing evil cult that was rising within Middle-earth, so his backstory and plan would have been great to know too. There is just so much that we could have had, but sadly we never will. One thing we can be certain of everything now though is, whatever happened, good would have come out on top. And we know this because it says in the section of the Tales of the Years of the Third Age, as a part of the Peoples of Middle-earth book again, that after Eldarion's rule, it should endure for 100 generations of men after him. So, there we have it, a look into the new Shadow, the unfinished and abandoned sequel to J R R Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. A story that at one point was set within the rule of Aragorn, but then later changed to his son Eldarion, and a story of men basically getting bored of good. When you talk about sequels, it could easily go two ways. We could have had something epic. After all, The Lord of the Rings came after The Hobbit, and look at the quality jump there. However, if you think about Star Wars, then sequels are not always the best thing. Maybe with him having never finished it, it keeps us interested. The grass is not always greener, as they say. I personally still feel like we would have had an amazing story from him, even if it was just a thriller, but sadly we will just have to make do with this short 13-page transcript that we had. It really is a bit of a shame. So I hope you all enjoyed this video today, and this now leads me on to my question of the day, and that is, how do you feel the new Shadow would have gone if it had been completed? Do you have your own ideas on what may have happened next? Or do you just think it is better that this was never followed through with? Please let me know all of your thoughts and opinions in the comment section below. And now firstly to quickly mention our other channels that will all be linked in the description below if you would like to check them out, and also to shout out our patrons. Firstly, we have our Divine Power tier members of Kevin, Abram and Matt. You are all awesome. And a big thanks to our Fire Demon tier members of Nashith, Denversteel and Gregory. And as well, I cannot forget the Wizard of Staff tier members of John, Andrew and Finrod Felagund. You are all true legends of the Brohirrim. Finally, if you've managed to reach the very end of the video with me today, remember, please hit that subscribe button so that we can hit that 150,000 subscriber goal. And why not drop a like on the video too if you enjoyed it. So, thank you once again if you have managed to reach the very end of this video with me today, and I will see you next time on the broken sword.